Marcus Rodriguez had been working as a security guard at the Meridian Financial Tower for 8 years. He knew every corner of the building, every executive who walked through those glass doors, and every secret meeting that happened after hours. But nothing prepared him for what he witnessed on that cold February evening. It was past midnight when Marcus noticed the black SUVs pulling up to the building's private entrance. This wasn't unusual for high-profile clients, but something felt different. The men who stepped out weren't the typical corporate executives he was used to seeing. They moved with military precision, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the late hour. J.D. Vance emerged from the lead vehicle, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Marcus recognized him immediately from the news coverage of his political career. But what struck him as odd was the large metal briefcase handcuffed to one of the men's wrists. In his years of security work, Marcus had never seen anything like it. The group headed straight to the 42nd floor, bypassing the usual sign-in procedures. Marcus watched the elevator numbers climb on his security monitor, his curiosity growing with each passing floor. The 42nd floor housed Apex International Holdings, a company that officially dealt in real estate investments but had always seemed mysterious to Marcus. As the night progressed, Marcus noticed more unusual activity. Phone calls were made in hushed tones, documents were shredded in large quantities, and at one point, he saw someone wheeling out what appeared to be servers covered in black cloth. The building's usual silence was broken by the constant movement of people and equipment. When Marcus tried to check the visitor logs the next morning, he discovered that all records from that night had been mysteriously deleted. The security cameras for the 42nd floor showed nothing but static during the exact hours of the meeting. It was as if the entire event had been erased from existence. But Marcus had one advantage that the visitors didn't know about. Years earlier, he had installed a small backup recording device in his security station, something he used to protect himself from false accusations. That device had captured everything, including audio from the building's intercom system that had accidentally been left open during the meeting. The recordings revealed conversations about offshore accounts, political favors, and most shocking of all, discussions about a $100 million transaction that seemed to involve government contracts and foreign investors. Marcus heard Vance's voice clearly discussing how certain political positions could be influenced in exchange for financial backing. As days passed, Marcus couldn't shake what he had witnessed. He researched Apex International Holdings and discovered a web of shell companies and international connections that seemed designed to hide the true source of massive financial transactions. The more he dug, the more he realized he had stumbled upon something that could shake the foundations of American politics. Marcus knew he was in possession of information that could destroy careers and potentially expose corruption at the highest levels of government. But he also knew that coming forward would put his own life at risk. The people involved in that midnight meeting had resources and connections that could make his life very difficult. After weeks of internal struggle, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He contacted Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist known for her fearless reporting on political corruption. When he shared the recordings with her, even she was shocked by the implications of what they contained. The recordings suggested that J.D. Vance had been involved in arrangements that could constitute bribery, money laundering, and potentially treason. The $100 million appeared to be connected to foreign entities seeking to influence American policy through strategic political investments. Marcus realized that he couldn't just be a silent witness to what might be one of the biggest political scandals in recent history. With Sarah's help, he began preparing a legal case that would force the truth into the open. The security guard who had spent years in the shadows was about to step into the spotlight and challenge one of the most powerful men in American politics. Sarah Chen had broken many political stories during her 15-year career, but the evidence Marcus brought her was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The audio recordings were clear, detailed, and potentially explosive. However, she knew that taking on someone of J.D. Vance's stature would require absolute proof and unshakable legal ground. The first challenge was authenticating the recordings. Sarah brought in Dr. Amanda Foster, a digital forensics expert who specialized in audio analysis. After days of testing, Dr. Foster confirmed that the recordings were genuine and had not been tampered with. The voice patterns matched known samples of Vance's speeches, and the background noise was consistent with the building's acoustics. While Dr. Foster worked on the technical analysis, Sarah began investigating the companies mentioned in the recordings. Apex International Holdings was just the tip of the iceberg. Through public records and international databases, she uncovered a network of at least 12 shell companies spread across the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Marcus, meanwhile, was growing increasingly nervous. Strange cars had begun appearing near his apartment building, and he noticed the same faces in different locations throughout his daily routine. Someone was watching him. Sarah advised him to vary his routes and avoid predictable patterns, but the stress was taking its toll on the security guard who had never asked for this level of attention. The breakthrough came when Sarah's investigation led her to a former employee of Apex International Holdings. Rebecca Martinez had worked as an accountant for the company until she was suddenly terminated 3 months after the mysterious meeting Marcus had witnessed. Rebecca had been afraid to speak up, but when Sarah approached her with evidence of what Marcus had recorded, she decided to come forward. Rebecca revealed that she had been asked to process unusual financial transactions in the weeks following that February meeting. Money was being moved through multiple accounts in ways that seemed designed to obscure its origin and destination. When she asked questions about the legality of these transactions, she was told to mind her own business and focus only on the numbers. Most importantly, Rebecca had kept copies of the financial documents she had been asked to process. These papers provided a clear money trail that connected directly to the conversations Marcus had recorded. The $100 million wasn't just talked about in the meeting. It had actually been transferred through the network of companies shortly afterward. Sarah now had audio evidence, financial records, and witness testimony. But she knew that going public with the story wouldn't be enough. J.D. Vance had teams of lawyers and political allies who could discredit any news report. What they needed was legal action that would force the evidence into a courtroom where it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Marcus made the difficult decision to file a whistleblower lawsuit. With Sarah's help, he contacted Daniel Harrison, a lawyer who specialized in government corruption cases. Harrison had successfully prosecuted several high-profile politicians and wasn't intimidated by powerful opponents. When Harrison reviewed the evidence, he immediately recognized its significance. The recordings and financial documents suggested violations of multiple federal laws, including the Foreign Agents Registration Act, money laundering statutes, and, potentially, the Espionage Act. If foreign governments were involved in influencing American policy, the legal team decided to file the lawsuit in federal court, seeking damages under the False Claims Act and demanding a full investigation into the financial network Marcus had uncovered. The suit would also request protection for Marcus as a federal whistleblower, giving him legal safeguards against retaliation. As they prepared the filing, Harrison explained to Marcus the serious nature of what they were alleging. If proven true, the charges could result in decades of prison time for everyone involved and would certainly end any political career. $100 million figure wasn't just about money. It represented what appeared to be a systematic effort to corrupt American political processes. Marcus understood the gravity of the situation, but he also knew that staying silent would make him complicit in what he had witnessed. The working-class security guard was about to take on one of the most powerful political figures in the country, armed with nothing but the truth and a recording device that had captured conversations never meant to be heard. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning in March. By that afternoon, news of the legal action had spread throughout Washington's political circles. J.D. Vance's office immediately issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and promising to fight the baseless accusations in court. But Marcus, Sarah, and Harrison knew they had something more powerful than denials. They had evidence, and soon that evidence would be examined under the bright lights of a federal courtroom where political influence couldn't shield anyone from the truth. Within hours of the lawsuit being filed, J.D. Vance's legal and political machinery swung into action. The response was swift, coordinated, and brutal. Marcus quickly discovered that challenging powerful people meant facing consequences he had never imagined. The first attack came through the media. By evening, 3 different news outlets were running stories questioning Marcus's credibility. Reports surfaced about a bankruptcy filing from 10 years earlier. a minor arrest for disturbing the peace during a college protest, and claims from anonymous sources that Marcus had been a disgruntled employee with a history of making false accusations. None of these claims were entirely accurate, but the damage was immediate. Marcus watched in horror as his personal life was dissected on national television. His ex-wife was contacted by reporters, his elderly mother received threatening phone calls, and his teenage daughter was harassed at school by journalists seeking comments about her father's allegations. Sarah Chen found herself under similar pressure. Her editor at the newspaper received calls from advertisers threatening to pull their support if she continued pursuing the story. Anonymous tips were sent to rival journalists claiming that Sarah had fabricated evidence in previous investigations. Her reputation, built over 15 years of careful reporting, was being systematically attacked. The legal assault was even more sophisticated. Vance's team filed a countersuit alleging defamation, invasion of privacy, and conspiracy to damage his political career. They claimed that Marcus had illegally recorded private conversations and that the entire lawsuit was a politically motivated attempt to derail Vance's rising political influence. More concerning was the investigation that began into Marcus's own finances. Federal agents appeared at his bank requesting records of all his transactions over the past 3 years. His tax returns were audited, and investigators began questioning his neighbors about his lifestyle and spending habits. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged powerful interests would face intense scrutiny of their own life. Rebecca Martinez, the former Apex employee who had provided financial documents, suddenly found herself facing charges related to allegedly stealing company property when she left her job. The documents she had shared with Sarah were claimed to be confidential business records that she had no right to possess. Her new employer was contacted and informed about the charges, resulting in her immediate termination. Daniel Harrison, the lawyer representing Marcus, discovered that his law firm was being investigated for potential ethics violations. Anonymous complaints were filed with the State Bar Association alleging that Harrison had solicited Marcus as a client inappropriately and had failed to properly verify evidence before filing the Yao lawsuit. The pressure extended beyond legal and professional attacks. Marcus noticed that his apartment was being watched more openly now. Cars would park outside for hours, and the same individuals would appear at the coffee shop where he bought his morning coffee and at the grocery store where he shopped. His sense of privacy and safety evaporated completely. Most troubling were the direct approaches. A well-dressed man approached Marcus outside his apartment building one evening, introducing himself as a representative of certain interested parties. He offered Marcus a substantial sum of money to withdraw his lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. When Marcus refused, the man's tone became less friendly, suggesting that Marcus was making powerful enemies who wouldn't forget his actions. Sarah received similar visits. A woman claiming to be a lawyer suggested that Sarah's investigation was based on forged documents and that continuing to pursue the story would result in serious legal consequences for both her and her newspaper. The woman presented what appeared to be expert analysis, claiming the audio recordings had been digitally manipulated. The psychological pressure was intense. Marcus began suffering from insomnia and anxiety attacks. He questioned whether he had made a terrible mistake in coming forward. The simple life he had built as a security guard was completely destroyed, and there was no guarantee that his sacrifice would achieve anything meaningful. But the counterattacks also revealed something important. The desperate measures being taken to discredit Marcus and suppress the story suggested that the allegations had struck close to home. Innocent people don't typically respond to accusations with such overwhelming force and coordination. Harrison pointed out that the speed and sophistication of the response indicated access to substantial resources and political connections. The fact that multiple government agencies were suddenly investigating Marcus's finances, that his employer was being pressured, and that his family was being targeted suggested that very powerful people were threatened by what the lawsuit might reveal. Sarah's investigation continued despite the pressure. She began documenting the intimidation campaign itself, recognizing that the attempts to silence Marcus might be as newsworthy as the original allegations. The systematic effort to destroy the credibility of everyone involved in exposing the truth was a story in itself. As the initial shock of the counterattack settled, Marcus, Sarah, and Harrison realized they were in a war of attrition. Their opponents had vastly superior resources, but they had something equally valuable: the truth and growing public interest in why such extreme measures were being taken to silence a security guard's accusations. The battle lines were drawn, and Marcus understood that there was no turning back. He had crossed a line that powerful people didn't want crossed, and now he would have to fight for his credibility, his safety, and his chance to expose what he believed was a massive corruption scandal that reached into the highest levels of American politics. Just when Marcus felt most isolated and overwhelmed by the powerful forces arrayed against him, help began arriving from unexpected sources. The brutal counterattack against a working-class security guard had touched a nerve with people who believed in justice and accountability. The first ally emerged from within the government itself. Agent Lisa Park from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had been quietly monitoring the case since the lawsuit was filed. Park had spent years investigating financial crimes involving political figures, and the evidence Marcus had presented matched patterns she had seen in other corruption cases. Park approached Harrison through official channels, indicating that the FBI was interested in the recordings and financial documents as part of a broader investigation into foreign influence in American politics. She couldn't promise protection from political pressure, but she could offer the resources of federal law enforcement to verify and investigate Marcus's claims. The FBI's involvement changed everything. Suddenly, the allegations weren't just a civil lawsuit between a security guard and a politician. They were part of a federal criminal investigation with the full weight of law enforcement behind them. Park assured Harrison that Marcus would receive proper whistleblower protection under federal law. Public opinion began shifting as well. The heavy-handed tactics used against Marcus had backfired. Social media campaigns emerged supporting the security guard who was willing to risk everything to expose corruption. Hashtags like "Dinjung Stand with Marcus" and "Sangchu Security Guard Hero" began trending as people shared their outrage over the intimidation campaign. A particularly powerful moment came when Marcus's daughter, Elena, posted a video on social media defending her father. The 18-year-old spoke eloquently about growing up with a father who had always taught her to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Her emotional appeal went viral, humanizing Marcus and countering the attempts to portray him as a disgruntled troublemaker. Financial support arrived from an unexpected source. The Government Accountability Foundation, a non-profit organization that supported whistleblowers, established a legal defense fund for Marcus. Within weeks, thousands of small donations poured in from ordinary Americans who wanted to support someone standing up to corruption. The fund eventually raised enough money to cover Marcus's legal expenses and provide financial security for his family. More evidence began surfacing as other witnesses gained courage from Marcus's example. Thomas Wright, a driver who had worked for the company that provided transportation for the February meeting, came forward with his own information. Wright had kept detailed logs of his routes and passengers, and his records corroborated the timeline of events Marcus had described. Wright revealed that he had transported the same group of individuals to similar meetings at 3 other locations over the past year. Each meeting had involved the same mysterious briefcases and the same careful avoidance of normal security procedures. Wright's testimony suggested that what Marcus had witnessed wasn't an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing pattern of secret meetings. Dr. Amanda Foster, the audio expert who had authenticated the recordings, received an unexpected call from a colleague at a major university. Professor Janet Mills had been contacted by someone claiming to represent J.D. Vance's legal team, offering her a substantial consulting fee to provide analysis contradicting Foster's findings. Mills had refused and instead contacted Foster to warn her about the attempt to buy contradictory testimony. The revelation that Vance's team was attempting to purchase expert opinions that would contradict the evidence provided another piece of the puzzle. Harrison immediately filed court documents detailing the attempted witness tampering, adding another potential charge to the growing list of questionable actions surrounding the case. Rebecca Martinez, despite losing her job and facing charges, refused to back down from her testimony. Her courage inspired 2 other former Apex employees to come forward with their own information about suspicious financial transactions. The pattern of evidence was becoming overwhelming, And it was clear that the corruption Marcus had uncovered was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. International support arrived when Johann Müller, a Swiss banking expert, offered to testify about the money laundering techniques described in the financial documents Rebecca had provided. Müller had been investigating similar schemes in Europe and recognized the sophisticated methods being used to move money across international borders while hiding its true origin. The media landscape also began shifting in Marcus's favor. While some outlets continued to attack his credibility, others started investigating the intimidation campaign against him. Several prominent journalists wrote articles questioning why such extreme measures were being taken against a security guard if his allegations were truly baseless. Sarah Chen's newspaper, despite pressure from advertisers, decided to stand behind her investigation. The editor-in-chief, Robert Kim, published an editorial defending the right of journalists to investigate corruption without facing retaliation. Kim pointed out that the attempts to silence the story were themselves newsworthy, and indicated that the allegations deserved serious investigation rather than suppression. Most importantly, the growing coalition of support gave Marcus the strength to continue fighting. The security guard who had felt alone and overwhelmed now realized that he was part of a much larger movement of people who believed in accountability and transparency in government. The tide was turning. What had started as a David versus Goliath battle was becoming a broader confrontation between those who believed in transparency and those who preferred to operate in shadows. Marcus was no longer fighting alone, and his opponents were discovering that their usual tactics of intimidation and suppression weren't working against someone who had captured the public's imagination as a symbol of ordinary people standing up to corruption. As the case moved toward trial, both sides prepared for a legal battle that would determine not just Marcus's credibility, but whether powerful political figures could continue operating without accountability to the American people they claimed to serve. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. had never seen anything quite like the media circus that surrounded the opening day of Rodriguez versus Vance. News trucks lined the streets, protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, and security was tighter than anyone could remember for a civil case that had evolved into something much larger. Judge Patricia Caldwell, known for her no-nonsense approach to high-profile cases, took immediate control of the proceedings. She banned cameras from the courtroom but allowed audio recordings, ensuring that the public could follow the testimony while maintaining the dignity of the legal process. Her first ruling set the tone. This case would be decided on evidence, not political theater. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table wearing his best suit, borrowed from his brother-in-law for the occasion. Despite months of preparation, he felt overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. Across the aisle, J.D. Vance was surrounded by a team of expensive lawyers whose combined hourly rates exceeded Marcus's annual salary. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Harrison delivered an opening statement that was both methodical and passionate. He laid out the timeline of events, from Marcus's initial witness of the secret meeting to the discovery of financial documents that traced the $100 million transaction. He promised to prove that Vance had engaged in a conspiracy to sell political influence to foreign interests in exchange for massive financial benefits. The defense's opening statement, delivered by Victoria Sterling, one of the country's most prominent white-collar defense attorneys, painted a completely different picture. Sterling argued that Marcus was a disgruntled employee seeking attention and financial gain through false accusations against a respected political figure. She characterized the recordings as taken out of context and suggested that the financial transactions were legitimate business dealings that had been misinterpreted by people without proper expertise. The first week of testimony focused on establishing the authenticity of Marcus's evidence. Dr. Amanda Foster took the stand to explain her analysis of the audio recordings. Under direct examination, she methodically explained how she had verified that the recordings were genuine and had not been tampered with. Her testimony was technical but compelling, establishing beyond doubt that the conversations Marcus had captured were real. Sterling's cross-examination of Foster was aggressive and thorough. She questioned the limitations of audio analysis technology and suggested that sophisticated forgery techniques could fool even experts. However, Foster held her ground. explaining that she had used multiple verification methods and that the recordings had passed every test for authenticity. Marcus's own testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the trial's first phase. Harrison guided him through the events of that February night, allowing Marcus to describe in his own words what he had witnessed. The security guard spoke simply and directly, without embellishment, describing how he had stumbled upon what appeared to be a massive corruption scheme. Under cross-examination, Sterling attempted to portray Marcus as unreliable and motivated by financial gain. She pointed to his modest background and suggested that he had been manipulated by others seeking to damage Vance's political career. However, Marcus's straightforward answers and obvious sincerity made it difficult for the defense to undermine his credibility. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Rebecca Martinez took the stand. Despite the charges she faced and the loss of her job, she testified about the suspicious financial transactions she had been asked to process following the February meeting. Her detailed knowledge of the money transfers provided crucial corroboration for Marcus's claims. Sterling's cross-examination of Martinez was particularly harsh, focusing on her alleged theft of company documents and suggesting that she was lying to avoid prosecution. However, Martinez remained calm under pressure, explaining that she had kept copies of the documents because she suspected they might be evidence of illegal activity and felt obligated to preserve them. The prosecution's case was strengthened by the testimony of Thomas Wright, the driver who had transported participants to multiple secret meetings. Wright's detailed logs and his matter-of-fact description of the unusual security precautions taken during these meetings helped establish that the February incident wasn't isolated but part of a pattern of suspicious activity. International banking expert Johann Müller provided perhaps the most damaging testimony for the defense. Miller explained how the financial network described in the documents represented a sophisticated money laundering operation designed to hide the true source of the $100 million transaction. His expertise made it clear that the financial arrangements weren't legitimate business dealings but deliberate attempts to circumvent legal oversight. The defense called its own expert witnesses to counter Mueller's testimony, but their explanations seemed forced and unconvincing. When Sterling's financial expert suggested that the complex international transactions were simply tax optimization strategies, several jurors appeared skeptical of the explanation. FBI agent Lisa Park's testimony provided the federal law enforcement perspective on the case. Park explained how Marcus's evidence had contributed to a broader investigation into foreign influence operations targeting American political figures. While she couldn't reveal details of ongoing investigations, her testimony made it clear that the FBI took Marcus's allegations seriously. As the prosecution rested its case, the evidence seemed overwhelming. Audio recordings, financial documents, witness testimony, and expert analysis had painted a detailed picture of corruption involving foreign money and political influence. However, everyone in the courtroom knew that Vance's defense team would fight back aggressively. The defense's case began with character witnesses for Vance, including several prominent political figures who testified about his integrity and patriotism. However, these testimonials seemed inadequate against the mountain of documentary evidence that had been presented. More concerning for the prosecution was the defense's attempt to introduce evidence suggesting that Marcus had been recruited by political opponents of Vance to fabricate his allegations. Sterling presented phone records and financial documents suggesting that Marcus had been in contact with individuals connected to opposing political campaigns. Harrison objected strenuously to this line of defense, arguing that it was an attempt to put politics rather than evidence at the center of the trial. Judge Caldwell allowed some of the evidence but warned the jury to focus on whether the specific allegations against Vance were true, regardless of any political motivations that might exist. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, both sides prepared for closing arguments that would determine whether a security guard's courage to speak truth to power would triumph over the resources and influence of one of America's most prominent political figures. The closing arguments began on a gray Monday morning that seemed to match the somber mood in the courthouse. Both sides knew that careers, reputations, and potentially the future of American political accountability hung in the balance of what the jury would decide. Harrison's closing argument was a masterful summary of the evidence that had been presented over 6 weeks of testimony. He walked the jury through the timeline of events, connecting Marcus's eyewitness account to the financial documents, expert testimony, and corroborating witnesses. His voice grew passionate as he described how a working-class security guard had risked everything to expose corruption at the highest levels of government. The prosecutor reminded the jury that this wasn't about politics or personal vendettas. It was about whether foreign money had been used to purchase influence over American policy through secret payments to a prominent political figure. He emphasized that the evidence was clear, documented, and verified by multiple independent sources. Sterling's closing argument for the defense was equally passionate, but took a completely different approach. She portrayed her client as the victim of a sophisticated conspiracy designed to destroy his political career. She argued that the evidence had been taken out of context, that the financial transactions were legitimate business dealings, and that Marcus had been manipulated by political opponents seeking to damage Vance. The defense attorney reminded the jury that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence and suggested that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that any laws had been broken. She characterized the entire case as an attempt to criminalize normal business relationships and political activities. The jury deliberated for 3 days, during which time speculation ran wild in the media about what their decision might mean for American politics. Marcus spent those days in a strange state of suspension, unable to work or think about anything other than the verdict that would determine whether his sacrifice had been worthwhile. When the jury returned, the courtroom was packed with reporters, supporters, and curious observers. Judge Caldwell called for order as the foreman stood to read the verdict. The silence was absolute as he announced that the jury found in favor of Marcus Rodriguez on all major counts, determining that J.D. Vance had indeed engaged in activities that constituted corruption and violation of federal laws governing foreign influence in American politics. The verdict awarded Marcus damages of $50 million, though everyone understood that the real victory wasn't financial but moral. The jury had validated his courage and confirmed that the evidence he had risked everything to expose was credible and significant. Vance's immediate response was to announce his intention to appeal the verdict, claiming that the trial had been a politically motivated witch hunt. However, the damage to his political career was immediate and irreversible. Within hours of the verdict, calls for his resignation began coming from members of his own party who could no longer afford to be associated with someone found liable for corruption. The FBI investigation that had been running parallel to the civil trial suddenly accelerated. Federal agents executed search warrants at multiple locations connected to the financial network Marcus had exposed. Within weeks, criminal charges were filed against Vance and several associates for money laundering, violation of foreign agent registration requirements, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The political consequences extended far beyond Vance himself. The verdict prompted congressional investigations into how foreign money might be influencing other American political figures. Campaign finance laws were scrutinized, and calls for transparency in political funding grew louder across the political spectrum. Marcus found himself transformed from an anonymous security guard into a symbol of ordinary Americans standing up to corruption. He was invited to speak at universities, received awards from government accountability organizations, and was profiled in major magazines as an example of civic courage. However, Marcus remained grounded despite his newfound fame. He used the financial settlement to establish a scholarship fund for working-class students pursuing careers in journalism and law enforcement. He wanted to ensure that future generations would have the tools and education necessary to hold powerful people accountable. Sarah Chen's investigation earned her a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. Her series of articles about the case and the intimidation campaign that followed became a textbook example of how important stories can be suppressed by powerful interests but ultimately revealed through persistent reporting and courageous sources. Rebecca Martinez, despite the personal costs she had faced, was vindicated when the charges against her were dropped following the verdict. She found new employment with a government accountability organization and became an advocate for whistleblower protection. Her expertise in financial analysis proved valuable in investigating other suspected corruption cases. The law firm that had represented Marcus received national recognition for taking on a difficult case against powerful opponents. Harrison's successful prosecution of the case led to his appointment as a special prosecutor for political corruption cases, giving him the resources to pursue similar investigations. 6 months after the verdict, J.D. Vance's political career was effectively over. Criminal proceedings were ongoing, and his attempts to maintain his political positions had failed as supporters abandoned him, and opponents used his conviction as evidence of systemic corruption. In American politics, the case had broader implications for American democracy. It demonstrated that even the most powerful political figures could be held accountable when ordinary citizens had the courage to speak up and when institutions like the legal system and free press functioned as intended. Marcus returned to work as a security guard, though he was now employed by the Government Accountability Foundation rather than a private company. His job was to help protect other whistleblowers who came forward with evidence of corruption. He often reflected on how a single decision to do the right thing had changed not only his own life but potentially the future of American political accountability. The case of Rodriguez versus Vance became a landmark in American legal history, cited in law schools and government ethics courses as an example of how transparency and accountability could triumph over power and influence when supported by courage, evidence, and institutional integrity. Marcus's story proved that in America, a security guard with the truth could still defeat a politician with millions of dollars, but only if he was willing to risk everything for justice.